Next guest is Larry Drake. He is the superintendent, and is a superintendent in New York State, and he's an adjunct at Binghamton University in New York. He's also the author of Identifying Small Habits Left Unchecked by School Leaders. Small faults can become major cracks. Dads, leaders, and father figures creating influence and legacy for a lifetime. He's a co-author of that book. Crisis Management, Effective School Leadership to Avoid Early Burnout, and a co-author on 100 No-Nonsense Things that all school leaders should stop doing. Well, welcome to the podcast, Larry.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time this morning. Very, very excited to be here. Always wonderful to have an opportunity to reflect on what we do. Things happen so fast that you 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock comes. So a chance to actually sit down and talk for a few minutes is fantastic. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great to connect with you a few months ago. And I know I've been connected with you on social media, but to have the conversation and plan out this podcast and find out about just your educational philosophy and what you've been doing in education. So we'll start off with the trench story. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Ooh, sure. So I can think back to my first year as a school principal. I was the principal of for our area, large elementary school. I'm in the Binghamton, New York area, about 600 students, lots of moving parts. And one of the traditions of this school district that I was in was an elementary Halloween parade around the grounds. And typically the principals dressed up and led the parade. You know, we're talking 2013, so a lot of scary things had happened in the world. And so that particular day was already very discombobulated. Schedules were different. Students were sort of, out of their routines a little bit. And we had 2 fifth graders leave campus. And the way the schedule worked, there's a little sliver of time between lunch and recess, and there's specials, their music class that particular day. And just a lot of adults kind of in the mix, and they were able to sort of slip out. And it was really not until about an hour after, I think, that we realized they were not in the building. So, panic sort of sets in. You're getting your team together, right? An assistant principal, we're looking at the Halloween parade starting in maybe an hour. I had planned to put on a Woody from Toy Story outfit.
Yeah.
And quickly scrapped that and said to my assistant principal, like, hey, we have to maintain some level of normalcy. We've got hundreds of parents outside that want to see their kindergartner dressed as, I'm not sure what it would have been back then. It's probably pre-Frozen, but something like that. So she put on her Minnie Mouse outfit and she led the parade. And I was in the main office, and the families of the students were coming in. We had called them. State police put out an Amber Alert. I had staff members. We combed the grounds. It's actually a pretty large campus for an elementary school. We had a nature trail and a field and all sorts of things. And, when we really finally realized they were not anywhere that we knew of, that was a hard moment. District office was very supportive. Turns out we got a break. There's a community member who saw a couple of fifth graders walking on their street at about 2 o'clock and thought, that's weird. Called the school, led the police went and got them, brought them back. But of course, they're coming through the lobby in the midst of hundreds of people now that the parade's over. And it was just a chaotic moment. I mean, there was no graduate course that prepares you to sort of maintain your professional profile while you're freaking out and still sort of guide that ship. And so, parents were very angry. How could you not know our child is in school? Very legitimate question. I remember when the whole thing was over, just being like, man, I don't know if I can do this. And, went home that night and realized that the best thing that I could do, because it was chaotic and the building knew what was happening, was get in there the next morning, get around early and just say good morning to people and just let them know that I'm okay and we're okay. And so I learned a lot in that moment about multiple moving parts and really prioritizing what needs to happen. Because the priority in that moment was that my office was basically a command center. There was an Amber Alert. The police are involved. And at the end of the day, we're talking about young children. And
Yeah.
so it was really, really interesting. And I reflect back on that now 11 years later. And I think there are things that happen every day in the superintendency, not quite to that level of severity, thankfully, but lots of moving parts, lots of people coming at you. And how do you weed through it and sort of come out of the trenches in a better place? And so that was kind of my first sort of trial by fire memory that I have in administration. I'd been a curriculum coordinator before that, but you don't face those kinds of challenges in that kind of role. So
Mhm.
I think we came out of the trenches in a good way, and I certainly learned a lot from it.
Yeah, like you said, there is going to be those types of situations that occur in leadership. And it's like you said, returning and having a smile on your face, greeting the parents and getting through it. And really, putting on that brave face, remaining professional. So thanks for sharing. So in the intro, I talked a little bit about you are as well an adjunct professor at
Mhm.
Binghamton University.
Yep.
So what type of courses do you teach?
Yeah, so since 2017, and I'm currently doing it right now too. This is the summer session number 1. I've taught the evaluation and supervision course, and that has really focused on the role that an administrator will play in evaluating teachers. New York State has a very well defined, for better or worse, teacher evaluation process,
Mhm.
but also evaluating and supervising really from the point of hiring. Like, what do you look for? What should references look like? Who should you be talking to? And then particularly also when it comes to support staff, in New York State, our teachers have and principals have a very well-defined multiple observation based on a rubric process. But your teacher aides, your office staff, it's often a once a year, how are you doing that takes place. So, one of the things that I really emphasize in that class is not to rely on the flower method. So I show
Mhm.
my wife I love her by buying her flowers on our
Mhm.
anniversary. And the other 364 days, I just assume we're good. So feedback, being situationally aware, like Marzano talks about, of being out and around and observing and having your ear to the ground. Certainly praising staff feedback is not just negative, but really reinforcing and modeling what you want to see. So
Sure.
I've taught that course for a number of years. It's often the first course a student takes in the program, because if they're admitted in the spring, it's the first chance they have to take a class. And a lot of our folks are obviously teachers and full-time jobs. They want to maximize the summer to get courses done. So I'm currently co-teaching it right now with another superintendent from upstate New York. I've also had the wonderful opportunity to teach the leadership theory class,
Okay.
which, when I was in just the way the universe works, the first time I taught that class was the spring semester of 2013, when I was
Mhm.
also applying for the superintendency, which, I had never done that before. So to really reflect upon my own leadership style in terms of that course was also beneficial for me. So I love teaching in that program because you're around folks that are right at the beginning of their career. And
Yeah.
I think it's that continual refreshing of, they're excited, they're nervous, they want to know kind of what the future is going to hold. And, this is my 15th year in administration. But to be around folks right at the beginning is really, really energizing. And so I've really enjoyed that. It's been a great experience for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and being an adjunct professor and really getting outside of your district, right, and having that time to collaborate with that co-professor as well as talking with these students, right? It gives you, like you said, a breath of fresh air to see what's happening in other parts of the state as well, and
Yep.
yeah, to keep going with that, like you said, since
Yeah.
2017.
And since
Yeah,
2017, I mean, that was the point in time where I know this sounds wild right now, but we used to actually drive to campus, park
yeah,
our car, physically walk into a building. When COVID came, the program went fully remote, and it stayed fully remote. It's synchronous, so it's not an asynchronous program. But we have students from all over New York State, and sometimes in neighboring states that are getting their New York State certification. So, I remember one class was sort of a nice mix of upstate New Yorkers, Westchester County, Long Island, New York City, one of the students in New York City was talking about how their school was going to be transitioned to a magnet school the next year, which we just don't have in my part of New York State. We don't even have charter schools within an hour of where I am. There's one in Ithaca, but Syracuse has them, in Albany, but not Binghamton. So it's really been a great opportunity for me, for the students in my immediate area, to learn from this other perspective. I mean, these students are in 3,000 student high schools. I can't even imagine. That's a big district where I live. So it's been a great opportunity to not just, you get the degree, you get your certification, all that stuff, but build this network of people that are from all over New York State and have so many different experiences. It's been great.
So you have let me know that you have a TED Talk recorded back in March, and it is now available, and the link will be in the show notes. It's called Lacking Expertise, the Counterintuitive Benefits. So tell me a little bit about how you got through the planning of that, and also I know there's an application process as well for TED Talks.
Yeah, so we had a local high school student, not in my district, but they used the first high school student in New York State to put on a TED Talk, and it was going to be at Binghamton University. And I got connected to him through, I used to teach in this school district as my first teaching job. So I got connected to him through someone that I knew. And, it was one of those things that when you have an opportunity to do it, you do it, because it's really once in a lifetime. And so as I thought about my topic, I thought about my career, and more often than not, I have been in leadership positions which on paper really wouldn't have made a lot of sense. So I was a 6-year high school teacher. I became a K-12 coordinator and really focused heavily on the elementary schools, RTI process, data, anti-bullying. It's sort of an anti-bullying became a mandate in New York State. So I really learned a lot from the elementary level. Then I became an elementary principal. And then shortly after that was elevated to an assistant superintendency for personnel. So now I'm, in the mix with personnel issues, and, I've been an administrator for 6 years. And so, one of the benefits of that was that I knew going into all of those situations that there's lots of people that I worked with that knew more than me. And I think what that's helped me do is realize that you need a team, you need to lean on others. When I became a school principal, I had a 3rd grade teacher retiring that year. She had been teaching 3rd grade longer than I had been alive at that point. So I'm not going into her classroom and saying, here's how you teach 3rd grade, right? But I learned a ton from her. We had some community things, some data things, some team things that we worked on as a building. And it really becomes, I think, more synergistic when the individual who has the formal authority title realizes that it's not really about them, and they have to rely on the expertise of others. Because the reality is, I haven't taught a student since June of 2010. Outside of Sunday school and Binghamton University, I have not taught a student since then. And so, if we're not listening to our staff and truly collaborating, co-laboring, as one of my colleagues here likes to say in this area, with our staff, and we're just behind closed doors and thinking we know it. And, I was a teacher for 20 years. So, certainly our experience can be a very big plus, but I also think there's some counterintuitive benefits to being into new situations where you really kind of have to figure it out. And so that was really the thrust of my talk, was, realizing that not being the expert in many situations can also have some profoundly positive impacts on your leadership.
Yeah, and really admitting that as well, like you said. I think people who are teachers, or in the district, they're always saying, though the superintendent is like, that ivory tower, and like being able to be humble and admit, like, hey, it's been a long time since I was in the classroom, learning from those people who were there with the students. And like you said, your path to the superintendency was a little bit different, being that coordinator as well as AP and principal. But really hearing from those staff members as well. Tell me a little bit about just finding the right superintendency. You're now wrapping up your first year as
Yeah.
superintendent.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that question, because part of one of the messages in the crisis management book, which is quite frankly not a great title. The book is really about, you're at the beginning of your career. There's a bunch of stories about actual administrators that are anonymous and them having to sort of navigate where they fit. Because the number one thing I think for your whole career, but certainly right away, is the fit. You go through your program and you take the law class and you take the business class. And the reality is, when you get your first administrative job, you're not the assistant superintendent for business, likely, right? You're a principal, you're an AP, you're a coordinator. You're not going to be responsible for the budget on day one of your administrative career. Something truly crazy happens, you're calling your district office for support. So the make or breaks at the beginning of your career, that's really what the book's about. It's about relationships and really finding your fit. And so, my thinking about the superintendency has really evolved over time. I will tell you, when I was in that principalship, probably that day of the trenches, my goal was to become a superintendent as quickly as possible. I had some young kids. My wife at that point wasn't working outside the home. She had been accessed from her district, and we were able to make that work for a couple of years. And sort of as my kids grew up, as my wife went back to work, in 2019, the superintendent of the school district, and I was the assistant, one of the two assistants, retired. And there was a lot of pressure at that age to apply, board members, community members. And in talking with my wife, it just wasn't the right time. And quite frankly, wasn't the right fit. And so, I left that district. I went to a bigger district. I was in charge of our budget. I really felt I needed that experience from the budget. It was kind of the one piece I hadn't had my hands on yet. And that district in our area is a very large district, 5,000 students, 10 buildings. The district office is on the third floor of a building that's not one of our schools. So it truly is an ivory tower, for better or worse. So when the district that I'm currently sitting in opened up, which is in our area, I mean, I've known of it for a little while, 1,600 students. We have a 612 campus with our athletic fields there. Our bus garage is right down a little side road. 2 elementary schools that are within 2 miles of each other. It really sort of fed my soul to think like, wow, I could be the superintendent of a district. My office, like right outside this window, is the main student entrance. So I open up the door over there and I'm right out. It's the cafeteria. It's the main student entrance. I have a standing desk. I'm around the building all the time. I think the majority of the students by their first name at this point. So you really have to kind of think about, and I had a superintendent say this to me once, you have to think about what kind of work you want to do. And the work that I want to do is directly with people. Yes, I know there are times you're in your office and you're superintendencing things that you need to do, but the reality is I can structure a schedule where the vast majority of my day is not sitting at this desk. I might be at a computer. I might be standing outside the cafeteria while kids are eating, but people are walking by. I'm talking to staff. I'm talking to students. I can get to both elementary schools for at least a day, if not a day and a half, every single week. And the reality is, with a computer and a phone, you can be anywhere. Yeah. So, and if I need to come back to the building for a little while, I can do that. So, I really think I would never want to be the superintendent of a district that's any bigger than this. And quite frankly, probably not anywhere else, because what I'm finding is now those relationships are being established. Like, we're really starting to move some needles. And again, it's not just me. I say, like, listen, I'm a happily married man. I know I'm wrong a lot. So, people have been willing to say, like, hey, I think we need to look at this differently. And I think it's because I'm not just this guy in an office in a suit, right? I'm out there making relationships, and that's really how I like to lead. That's what feeds my soul. So finding your fit in any position is really, really important. And, I say to these students right at the beginning of your career, just because there's a principalship 30 miles away that you could be the principal of, doesn't mean you should be. Yeah. If you've got young kids and you're going to have to be at events, you can do it, you can try it. I think there's value to being a little selective. So yeah, it's been great. I can't believe it's the end of the first year. We had a successful budget vote this week. We successfully passed a referendum for an electric bus. New York State has some mandates coming down the pike. We had a grant that made the electric bus the same cost as a diesel bus because it's about twice as much right now. We put that in front of our community as a separate vote because, hey, if our community isn't ready for this, then let them vote no. And we'll take that feedback and we'll learn from it. And so we passed that. We're excited to get our drivers and our mechanics a little familiar with this new technology. So we've got a great team and a great community. It's been a good fit.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, it seems like you found your niche. You're in a district where you can be out amongst the students and really learn from them. And you said you've been driving some buses, you've been subbing as well.
All buses. I wouldn't get behind the big one yet, but we had a couple of situations where, we have students going to 3 students going to a special program and, I can jump in a small little van or a small bus and get them there. So yeah, it's been good. And subbing every now and again, we've actually made some great inroads into our sub coverage, but it was dicey in the fall. So yeah, I think little things like that. And, I feel like I'm sincere about them, but they also make a really strong impression on staff when they see the superintendent kind of jumping in and being willing to get their hands dirty a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Talk to me a little bit about 2 of your books. So I wanted to talk about identifying small habits left unchecked by school leaders. Small faults can become major cracks. So that was published in 2022.
Yes. So the first book I referenced was really, I wrote that and it was real sort of during the COVID era. So I started it in I think the end of 2019. I was doing research in 2020. Then everything shut down and the publisher shut down and, it ended up coming out a little bit later. But that book was really for those people that are just finishing their career, in terms of what are all the things that you're not taught in graduate programs, having taught in one for a little while. Because again, like I said, you're not in charge of the budget on day one. The class is valuable, don't get me wrong, but that's not what's going to get you to the next level. That's not what's going to get you, successful in that first job. The Identifying Small Habits book was actually more reflecting upon leaders that are more established. They're probably pretty good at their jobs. However, we all have these little habits that detract from how effective we could really be. They don't make us ineffective. They don't make us awful. However, if we don't check them, we're not cognizant of them, they can deteriorate our effectiveness. And I'll give you an example from my principalship. One of the chapters is on playing favorites. And I think any good leader would say, I don't play favorites. And I was the same way. I was intentional about not playing favorites. So I was the principal again of an elementary school. 98% of the staff is female, which is just the way it is, right? Like you get your random 5th grade or phys ed teacher who's a guy. So we had a couple of men in the school and, I'm 33, 34 at this time. They're young. We're all kind of the same age. And I just remember there being times where I think in my mind, I was like, man, I just want to go talk to a guy. Yeah. So football, the Yankees, the Mets, a little banter about that, nothing crazy. But I had maybe midway through my first year, a female teacher who was on my interview committee and was part of that team that recommended me as a hire. So who was pretty invested in my leadership, said, hey, Larry, I just want to pull you aside for a second. There's a little bit of a whispering campaign that you're kind of favoring a couple of people. You're in the room a lot. And we had just put out a computer lab schedule. This is back before anyone was one-to-one. It's just a different era, right? So classes could sign up for the computer lab, a room full of 30 desktops. And one of these teachers that I was being perceived as favoring got like the prime spot. I can't remember if it was like right before lunch or right after lunch, but like a nice, not interfering with your ELA block. And it was I put it up on the wall and I emailed and I said, hey, this is going to be up tomorrow at this time. First come, first serve. And so I really sort of took a step back when she said that. And I said, well, God, I'm trying to do the opposite. She said, well, listen, Larry, people are noticing whose room you're in and who you're not in.
Mhm.
And so I think even in these subtle ways, we leave an impact that people could perceive differently. So I had to kind of check myself. Not that I ghosted anyone or didn't have conversations, but I was more cognizant of where I was physically spending my time. Because where a leader puts their proximity and their time does have symbolic reasons. If I sat in this office all day, that means something very different than if I'm out in buildings.
Mhm.
I could be doing the same kind of work in the hallway that I'm doing here, but the fact that I'm in the hallway says something different about me as a leader. And so I really had to kind of say to myself, like, I get it. It was a blind spot. It was a little crack in my leadership that I'm thankful someone said to me and I could check. But those are the kinds of things that I think, again, did it make me a bad leader? Did it make me ineffective? I don't think so. But it was having an impact. And so that's just a small example of there's 37, 38 chapters in that book, spending too much time on email, not dressing professionally, throwing your boss under the bus, oh, the district office wants us to do this and I don't want to. All of those things can really detract from someone's effectiveness. They can impact maybe not your job right now, but your ability to get the next job. If you're looking to go from assistant principal to principal or principal to, district office, whatever the case may be, it certainly can have an impact in the job that you're in currently.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so that sounds definitely like something that would be great for a leader to pick up, to really kind of be aware, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
always pointed by somebody like that teacher. And, people go about their business and don't really sometimes know of some of these small
And it's
habits.
so hard to step outside ourselves and like a boat going through placid water, like we all leave this wake when we enter a room, we exit a room, we walk through the building. Like the leader, you're just very contagious as a leader. And so what we value or give our attention to really does matter. And so, I've had some folks that are 20-year veteran principals. They've been in the same building for 20 years. They're really good at their job. And they've said to me, like, that chapter, I see myself, I'm emailing way too much. I got to go have a conversation, right? Because you send a couple of emails where only 7% of the message is getting through because it's words, it's not intonation, it's not body language, can lead to some misunderstandings that can just perseverate over time. So I've had some really very effective, in my opinion, veteran principals say, like, that was helpful. So I'm hoping that's the impact that it has.
Mm-hmm. You also wrote a chapter in 100 No Nonsense Things that all school leaders should stop doing. Tell me about what that chapter is about.
Yeah, so I am, Dana, a recovering, I'm going to admit it here. My name is Larry, and I'm a recovering people pleaser. So I grew up in, knock on wood, very structured, stable, conflict-free home. Went to a small high school and then a small college. And I just remember getting into my teaching career, first of all, running into like the first person that was truly just a jerk. Like this veteran teacher was just not nice to anyone, including me at 24. I'm thinking, like, what did I do? Right? Like,
Yeah.
and you cope with that by trying to make people happy. And so as I've gone through the years here, what I've realized is it's not really about getting people to like you or not like you. Like that's the wrong paradigm. It's not even the right way to think about it, right? It's more about how do I show up and have an impact and be ethical and know that I'm doing things for the right reasons. And when that lands in a certain way, there will be people that don't like it. And that's okay. Because I think to go through and to feel like your main focus is to have people like you. Again, I've known some leaders where I think this is their MO. And I just firmly believe at this point in my life that difficult conversations, and if I'm in possession of information that I know needs to be disseminated to someone, I'm going to do it in a very respectful way. It's never fun, but again, it's not about like or dislike. It's about being open and honest and transparent, values driven. And so I really have worked hard, and like everything, you slip back into it, right? You're like, why does
Yeah.
this person? You slip into it all the time, but this idea that it's not about that, it's the wrong way to think about it. It's not like or
Yeah.
dislike. It's am I validating, valuing, being ethical? Do I really represent all students? I've had some experiences this year when you start advocating for different groups that maybe haven't been advocated for as vociferously, you get some
Yeah.
pushback. You get some pushback, and it's not negative pushback, but it's like, well, why can't we just send this student to an alternative placement? Because that's not the way it works. Some students do need that. Don't get me wrong, but not everyone. So I think being values driven is really important, and the like dislike paradigm. You've got to find a way to be comfortable with people disagreeing with your values or your stance. Doesn't make them an evil person, but we all come at it from different perspectives and have different agendas and have different experiences. So I think giving them the space to be like, yeah, I know we disagree. That's okay. Is important as well.
Yeah, like you said, it's learning how to navigate those situations. Like you're going to have difficult conversations as a leader, but it's knowing like to not try to just smooth everything over all the time, because there's going to be situations where people get upset, and it's navigating. That's a huge part of leadership is
Yeah.
knowing how to being effective in having some difficult conversations.
And I think it's
Well,
hard when you start. It's hard when you
yeah,
first start. I remember this when I was an elementary principal. I was fully aware of my lack of experience at
yeah,
33, being an elementary principal of this big building. And so you sort of compensate by trying to make people comfortable, right? Like I want them to like me. I want to be here. And I remember finally the assistant super that I worked for at that time said to me, Larry, your job is not to make everyone comfortable. Your job is to create a
yeah.
culture and an environment where everyone can do their best work.
Hmm.
And again, it's not about making people uncomfortable, but I think we get psyched out into some of those paradigms that just don't serve us well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've had a great conversation today around your leadership, some of your writing, your TED Talk. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is being in a place where you feel like you can do your best work. And we all have these different legs of stools in our life. Our professional leg of the stool, our family. I've got kids that are 14, 12, and 9. Um, you know, been married to my wife for 17 years, a home, all those things that you're working on. And it's really important to not pursue, in my opinion, positions that are going to get that out of whack. Now, do I get to
Mhm.
every one of my daughter's lacrosse games? No. I went for the first 3 quarters last night, and then we had a championship game here that I wanted to get to because I knew it was going to be packed and contentious. And so it's a good game for the superintendent to show up to. And I love supporting our students. But again, I can kind of work out more often than not in this position, those aspects of my life. And I
Sure.
think the biggest thing that I would leave you with is I think I see so many leaders get faked out with what I'll call the bachelorette moment. Like, hey,
Mhm.
Dana, will you accept this rose? You'd be great at this principalship. You could do
Yeah.
it, right? Like a tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, that's wonderful. It's great. It's a great moment. But, the person doing the tapping on the shoulder, giving you the rose, has their own agenda. And it's not necessarily negative towards you. They want someone good to fill that position, but they're not coming at it from the same perspective that you are internally. Is this good for me? And I do
Yeah.
think there's sort of being the CEO of your career, you have to sort of make some of those decisions, and being aware of what you're getting yourself into is really important. So finding your fit to me is the most important part of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can people connect with you and find you
Yeah.
online?
I'd say the best place probably X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, at Larry Dake. I'm on LinkedIn at Dr. Larry Dake, Facebook at Larry Dake. Website. We didn't talk about this book, but we're going to be doing some summits this summer. Actually, now that we're talking about that. So dadsleadersandfatherfigures.com, where we're
Mhm.
starting to think about, and again, very small right now, how do we bring a group of like-minded dads and leaders together. We're not going to go out to a baseball game and drink a bunch of beers. This is about how do we evaluate our impact in all these areas of our lives and do some really deep work. So that book about being a father and a leader is also on my Amazon page. If that really resonates with you, check out that dadsleadersandfatherfigures.com website for more information.
Great, great. And when is that summit?
So right now we're planning it for July 29th here in Binghamton. It's really small. I don't know if it's going to get off the ground right now, but we certainly have some aspirations to do more with that work, because the three other gentlemen that I wrote the book with, the stories in there are really impactful. And, again, we all have this balancing act to do. And how do we do it to where we're serving all of our constituencies, school, home, children, family, to the best of our ability. So that's really what that book is about. It's a series of little stories. I write about, letting my son know that Bo Jackson was amazing in the first Tecmo Bowl, and then having him beat me in Tecmo Bowl, right? It was kind of a fun dad moment. Like, you come home, you're in that work mode, and you're playing Tecmo Bowl with your 10-year-old. It's just finding that balance of how to be who you are, where you are in that moment. And it's exciting. So dadsleadersandfatherfigures.com, more information on that kind of stuff.
Great, great. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yes.
Really loved our conversation, and hope people can reach out to you and also get some benefit from some of the books that you've written, and view your TED Talk as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate your time. Have a fantastic rest of your day.